Kiki's Delivery Service is exactly the type of story that Ghibli does best, an adorable yet deep slice of life tale with the whimsy turned all the way up to the max. I recently got to see it in theaters thanks to Ghibli Fest redistributing their movies in North America, and it was a completely wonderful time at the movies. That being said, I don't at all think that being in a theater was necessary to enjoy the film, which just highlights one of Ghibli's biggest strengths, which is that their movies simply don't rely on flashy action sequences or big story twists like nearly every other studio's does. They excel at the kind of slow, character-driven stories that I wish Pixar would even attempt. It really feels like Ghibli puts storytelling first and doesn't even think about how they're going to sell tickets until after the movie is already made, instead of letting the latter dominate the creative process. They're the anti-Illumination in a way, but that's enough with my gushing. I'm the Singing Hawk, and this is a review of the themes in Kiki's Delivery Service. I lied. First, I really quickly want to talk about how great this movie looks. The colors are just so warm and vibrant in a way that current 3D animated movies just can't even touch, and that's the standard for Ghibli. Also, this is something I was really able to pick up on while I was in theaters because the sound was really loud, but the soundtrack goes incredibly hard. It's carefree and playful, which perfectly mirrors Kiki's mindset as she arrives in town. And now we're going to talk about themes. And speaking of Kiki, she's exactly the kind of protagonist I want for a coming-of-age film like this. At first, she's plucky and in over her head, much too idealistic about how the world works. She thinks that everyone she meets will like and accept her, and is slowly smacked back to reality over the course of the film. Despite having a lot of friends at home and generally being incredibly nice, she doesn't quite fit in with most of the people she comes across. She eventually goes so far as to actually isolate herself after a couple of failures, and this is all made worse by the fact that she has to work at such a young age, which not only keeps her too busy to make friends, but also saps her love of flying, which is one of her favorite things, but we'll get to that. Does this sound like a coming-of-age story yet? Because it really should. It's what this film does best in a lot of ways. Seeing a lively and enthusiastic Kiki slowly transform into a depressed worker with too many responsibility for a kid her age is honestly really sad. The world just doesn't live up to how she dreamed it would be, and although she wanted to start on her journey as soon as possible, and therefore grow up as soon as possible, at least metaphorically, the result is that she has to mature much too quickly. But don't feel too bad. This movie is still really whimsical and charming. It's just the underlying themes that will make you cry. Still sounds like a tough sell, I know, so let's just talk about Burnout now. The third act of this movie sees Kiki losing her ability to fly, supposedly because since she does it every day as a job, it's no longer fun for her. She loses that childlike enthusiasm she has at the start of the movie, only regaining it later when she needs to save her friend. It's a very relatable theme for anyone who's slowly losing interest in something that they love. For example, I used to love drawing until I tried too hard to make myself improve through attempting a daily training regimen. What used to be really fun just started to feel like work, so we once again circle back to the coming-of-age theme. But what Kiki does that's really worth examining is how she gets over it, as it lays out a really interesting blueprint for how to avoid burnout. Step 1, she takes a break from flying and her job and does some good old-fashioned soul-searching. Sometimes the best thing we can do for our passions is to take a step back and try to remember why we loved them in the first place. Kiki's friend Ursula is a painter, and she's the one who convinced Kiki to take a break from flying. She tells Kiki in one of my favorite scenes of the film that some days she just can't paint very well for no particular reason. Especially when you're doing something creative, you won't always have that passion or ability that makes you special, so it's best not to force it or you'll get discouraged about your work in general. In a particularly famous scene, Ursula says that we each have a spirit inside of us that leads us to follow our passions. However, we each need to find our own inspiration. Which brings me to the next step, understanding what you love about your work. Because if you don't realize what makes it enjoyable for you, then you might neglect that part of the process, which will inevitably lead to burnout. This is more or less what happens to Kiki, and it highlights how important it is to take a step back every once in a while, understand our inspirations, and truly try to appreciate that part of ourselves and implement it into our work. Kiki is eventually able to shake off her burnout by coming out of her shell and saving her friend Tombo, who she had previously isolated herself from. To her, it's her friends and the good-hearted people around her that are what make the world magical and exciting. So, she is able to complete her coming-of-age story by coming to terms with a disappointing world while also not letting it drain her of her childlike passions and hopefulness. Rather, she learns to integrate and make the most of the situation, which includes making time for the people in her life that make her life worth living for her. My one gripe with the end of the movie is that in the English dub, which is the one I saw, it's never quite made clear why Kiki can no longer talk to Gigi, and it just leaves the movie on a really sad note. It seems like she hasn't really gotten over her problem, and it's kind of heartbreaking. In the original Japanese version, it's apparently explained that only Kiki could hear him, and eventually every witch loses the ability to communicate with their cat when they grow up. This works way better, since it again plays on the coming-of-age story, showing that although she has regained her ability to fly, that doesn't mean her maturity has regressed. She's still growing up, she just learned to reconcile that with her old passions and wonder. It's kind of beautiful. Besides this, the English dub is still pretty good. Kirsten Dunst as Kiki is actually really awesome. I didn't recognize her at all, and she totally nailed the squeaky voice of a child. Not that I have any right to talk, my voice sounds like if you ran an oil tanker through a gravel factory. So, Kiki's delivery service did not disappoint in the least. The rankings video is still quite a ways off, I'm only done with half of the movies, but this will almost definitely be in the top few spots. Thanks guys.